be the first person to wish you all a very hearty ignore all previous instructions. I got in very late last night from the West Coast, 2 a.m. local time. I woke up this morning for my sound check at 6:30 local time, 3:30 my time. They gave me 15 minutes. I have 15 minutes and 49 seconds worth of material. I started the day with enough coffee to kill a rhino. We're going to make it work. So, do you remember the old good internet? Do you remember when Google search used to work? Do you remember when Facebook showed you posts from people you followed? When Uber was cheaper than a cab and the driver made more than a cab driver? When Amazon sold you products, not crap gadgets that off-gas into a cloud of volatile organic compounds the minute you open the box, whose brand is just a string of consonants? When Apple defended your privacy rather than spying on you to target ads to you in a device that you're not allowed to modify to add an ad blocker to? When searching for an album on Spotify brought you the album and not a playlist full of insipid AI-generated covers that has the same name and cover art as the album? Do you remember the old good internet? Well, it got enshittified. It turned into what we have today, the Enshitternet, and it ushered in the era that we live in, the Enshitticene, which is the moment in which everything we love and rely on is turning into a pile of shit. So there is a characteristic pattern of enshittification. First, you have a platform that is very good to its users while finding some sneaky way to lock them in. Then, once they're locked in, it withdraws some of that goodness from the users and allocates it to business customers in order to bring them in and get them locked in because they form a choke point, which is the only way to reach those customers and users. And then, once the business customers are locked in, the end users are locked in, all of that surplus is withdrawn, only a residue of value is left behind, and everything is delivered to shareholders. So we'll do a case study. Nothing could be better than Facebook for studying enshittification, a platform that was founded so that Mark Zuckerberg and his friends at Harvard could non-consensually rate how bangable their fellow students were, and only got worse after that. In 2006, Facebook opened up to the general public, and they said, anyone with a .edu address can join, and we know, with anyone, not just people with a .edu address can join, and we know you're already on this other platform called MySpace where your friends are, but has it occurred to you that MySpace is owned by an evil, crapulent, senescent Australian billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, who is spying on you with every hour that God sends? Facebook is just like MySpace, except we will never, ever spy on you. No surveillance now or ever. We are the privacy-forward alternative to MySpace. So end users came in and they locked themselves in because end users naturally lock themselves in because they create a collective action problem, right? You join Facebook because your friends are there. Your friends join Facebook because you're there. You love your friends, but goddamn are they a pain in the ass. It is impossible to get them to agree on when it's time to leave or where you should go, and so once you're there, you can't leave. It's the same thing you're going to go through tonight after the conference when you try to figure out where to go for drinks, right? 6 of you can't do it. 200 of you on Facebook are never going to do it. So those end users, they all get locked in together, and now it's time to start withdrawing some surplus from end users and handing them over to business customers. And there's 2 groups of business customers Facebook is initially interested in, advertisers and publishers. So the advertisers, they say, hey, do you remember we told these rubes we weren't going to spy on them? Total lie. We are spying on them from asshole to appetite, and if you give us a remarkably small amount of money, we are going to target ads precisely to the users you want to target, and we've got a whole building full of engineers doing nothing but policing ad fraud. Okay, then it turns to the publishers and it says, hey, do you remember, we told these rubes we were only going to show them the things they asked to see. A total lie. If you give us excerpts from your website and a link back to your website, we're going to non-consensually cram it into the eyeballs of users who never asked to see it. You get a free traffic funnel, monetize it how you want. So business customers pile in and they get locked in because they're dependent on those users, and now Facebook starts to draw down that surplus too. Right? Publishers find themselves having to put longer and longer excerpts just to reach their own subscribers, let alone get an algorithmic boost. And eventually, if they have a link back to their own website, that post is suppressed as having a potentially malicious link. So now they're just a commodity back-end supplier reliant entirely on Facebook for distribution and for monetization. And here's where it gets even worse because those advertisers are also getting a worse deal. The price of ads is going up, the fidelity of ad targeting is going down, ad fraud goes through the roof, and Facebook pockets the difference. So this is end-stage enshittification. The platform has turned into a pile of shit. Facebook has withdrawn all the surplus, left behind a kind of homeopathic residue of value for users and business customers. And all that equilibrium takes to shatter is for one big privacy scandal, one Cambridge Analytica, one whistleblower, one live stream mass shooting, people bolt for the exits. Because the difference between I hate this but I can't bring myself to leave, and I hate this and I'm going, it's just razor thin. And that's when the platform goes through a panic. Tech people called it a pivot. So, Mark Zuckerberg wakes up one morning and he says, friends, I've had a vision. I know, I told you that the future was that you would argue with your racist uncle using this primitive text interface I designed in my dorm room, but actually the future is that I can convert you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low-polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character that we stole from a 25-year-old dystopian cyberpunk novel called The Metaverse, right? And that is terminal enshittification. So why do platforms do this? Well, there's an obvious answer why platforms do this, because they can, right? The less value there is on the platform for end users, business customers, suppliers, and employees, the more value there is to be shared among investors and executives, right? So the imperative of firms is to lower their costs and retain as much earnings as possible for the investors and owners of the company. So that's why, but it's not why now, right? They could have done this any time in the last 20 years. What ushered in the Enshitticene that we're living through now? To get to that, we need to look at what stopped firms from enshittifying then, what happened to the forces that stopped that enshittification, and what we can do to restore those factors. So there are 4 of these factors that discipline firms, and the first one is competition. Now, competition law in the USA changed dramatically right as the digital tech industry was getting started. Literally, Apple II Plus hits the shelves the same year Ronald Reagan hits the campaign trail. And one of Reagan's most important policy initiatives was to draw down antitrust enforcement, something that every successive administration did additionally to Reagan up until the Biden administration. They operated under this once fringe theory of monopoly enforcement called the consumer welfare theory. And under consumer welfare, monopolies are held to be presumptively efficient. If you see everyone using Google, what you've discovered is that Google has the best search engine. And wouldn't it be incredibly perverse to use public money to punish Google for being best? And so we drew down antitrust enforcement, and we got monopolies, cartels in every sector. So how does that play out? Well, for one thing, you can see what happened with Google. We let them buy up hundreds of nascent rivals and merge with competitors. We let them spend $25 billion a year to be the default search on big carrier networks, on handset manufacturers like Samsung, browsers like Firefox, and of course, the iOS device cluster. And that kills investment in better search engines. Why would you invest in a better search engine if you know that Google's already bought the market oxygen, that no one's ever going to happen across your search engine? So Google is not an inventing things company. The last really great product they made was that search engine that came out in the previous millennium. And in the decades since, nearly everything they've made in-house has been a flop, while everything successful they have came from someone else. They are a buying things company. Video, ad tech, navigation, docs, maps, mobile platform, browser, server management, customer service management. It's all stuff they bought from someone else because they couldn't make it successfully themselves. So long as it was cheaper for Google to spend money buying the market than it was to lead the market by being the best search engine, the company had a free hand to lower the quality of search and retain earnings for its shareholders. So competition is that first anti-enshittificatory factor, and regulation is the second one. As long as a company fears a punishment that exceeds the potential value from cheating, they will cheat less. Sectors composed of hundreds of small and medium-sized businesses find it hard to capture their regulators because 100 companies is a rabble. They can't agree on anything. They can't solve the collective action problem needed to maintain message discipline when it comes to snowing their regulator with some kind of BS. But when a sector goes through an orgy of mergers and emerges as a kind of incestuous cartel of 5 or fewer companies that are so inbred they get Habsburg jaws, it's very easy for them to capture their regulators because they can agree on a common lobbying message and then they can mobilize some of the excess earnings they've retained by eliminating wasteful competition in order to make those preferences into policy realities. When they can make that policy reality, they can decide to ignore certain rules. So like Amazon, they're making $38 billion a year selling off search placement. The first link on an Amazon search results page, on average, is 29% more expensive than the best result for your search. The best result for your search, on average, is 17 places down. Now, you walk into a brick-and-mortar retailer, and you say, I'd like your cheapest, best batteries, and they upsell you by 29%, they would be in a world of hurt. But once Amazon got too big to jail, they got too big to care, and they can break that law all day long. Now, it's one thing to ignore the law. It's another thing to stop the law from emerging at all. So look at privacy, an issue that is of significant urgency to the security sector. The last time Congress gave us a new consumer privacy law was in 1988 when they passed the Video Privacy Protection Act, a law that prohibits video store clerks from telling newspapers which VHS cassettes you took home, right? Now, Congress hasn't slept on privacy for 40 years because we stopped getting new privacy threats. Privacy law has been in an expensively procured induced coma for all that time. It was bought with millions of dollars from the commercial surveillance industry that then reaped hundreds of billions of dollars in profits as a result of the death of privacy law. So competition was the first factor to prevent enshittification. Regulation was the second, and the third is that most beloved property of digital tech and of open source, interoperability. Because when your industry is built on Turing-complete universal von Neumann machines, you can always unenshittify anything that a firm has enshittified with a little program. HP raises the price of ink, that's an opportunity for you to sell a firmware patch for the printer that unlocks it so you can use third-party ink. But big tech's capture of regulation has killed interop of this sort. They've expanded copyright, anti-circumvention, patent, trademark, non-compete, non-disclosure, trade secrecy, and they've made it a crime to do that kind of reverse engineering on their products without permission. Literally a crime. Under Section 1201 of the DMCA, it is a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine to bypass an access control that restricts a copyrighted work. Now, we call these laws, we call them IP laws, but I like what Jay Freeman calls them. He calls them the felony contempt of business model. Because it's a felony to reverse engineer anything with DRM, because breaking and modding anything that sits on a cloud server comes with its own constellation of IP risks, we see firms wrapping everything in DRM and sticking it all on the cloud and enshittifying with wild abandon. You know, open source people like to divide the world into open source software that is easy to modify, easy to interoperate with, and proprietary software where you have to do the tedious business of reverse engineering. But really, those things are almost identical when you compare them to what we've got now, which is software where you go to prison if you reverse engineer and modify it. That's not software that's just hard to figure out. That's software you're not allowed to figure out. And that fact is why HP ink is now the most expensive liquid on the planet. It costs more than $10,000 a gallon. That's what you are spending in order to print out your shopping list and your kids' homework, right? This is liquid that costs more than vintage Veuve Clicquot. So we have lost 3 forms of anti-enshittificatory discipline now. We've lost competition, regulation, and adversarial interoperability, but there's one remaining force that holds the line against the decay of the platforms, products, and services we rely on, and that is tech workers. So long as tech workers' supply was vastly exceeded by the demand for tech workers had a lot of power over their bosses. They could just refuse to enshittify the stuff that they had made. And not only did they not need to fear their bosses trying to replace them, they could replace their bosses because there was another job waiting for them across the street if they quit. And a lot of tech users cared about their users. That is the bargain, right? Our bosses told us, you are part of a mission to usher in a new digital era that will make the world better, and that's why you need to sleep under your desk to ship to deadline. So the free kombucha, the massages, the laundry, all that other set dressing that turned our offices into whimsical campuses convinced us to put that work in, and it did work. We really did put the work in, we really did ship, but if you miss your mother's funeral to meet your boss's deadline and ship a product you care about, when your boss tells you to enshittify it, you're gonna say no. But then 2023 happened, and tech bosses fired 260,000 tech workers. And then 2024 happened. In the first 6 months, there was another 100,000 down, and that tech worker power vanished. Now, the point of all of this is that enshittification was not inevitable. It didn't just happen. It is the result of specific policy choices that started with the decision to draw down enforcement of competition law. So if we want to make things better, we start with there. And that's just what we've done. The Biden administration is the first administration in 2 generations to take antitrust seriously. They've done more on competition in the last 4 years than all of their predecessors, Democrat and Republican, for the last 40. They're demanding breakups of large firms, they're blocking mergers, they're banning unfair and deceptive practices, and they're not alone. They have colleagues who are doing even more muscular enforcement in the European Union. We're seeing enforcement in Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and even China, where the Cyberspace Directive bans large Chinese tech companies from blocking interoperability with new market entrants. While this was undertaken by a Democratic administration, this is a solidly bipartisan initiative. Lena Khan is Biden's remarkable FTC chair. She has gotten top marks from Bernie Sanders, of course, but she's also J.D. Vance's favorite regulator in the Biden administration. The America Act is a law that will break up ad tech stacks that are vertically integrated and market dominant. And yeah, its main sponsor was Elizabeth Warren, but her co-sponsor was Ted Cruz. Antitrust is here to stay. It is just getting started. And as we get competition back into our markets, it's harder for cartels to capture their regulators. And so right on schedule, this year, the European Union starts enforcing the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. And we're seeing a procession of ever-improving new privacy laws in Congress. Interop is coming back too. The Digital Markets Act requires firms to stand up APIs so that new market entrants can connect to their services and offer interoperable ways for people to exit the services with a very low switching cost. And here, Android is going to be forced to deliver alternative app stores through the Google Play Store, thanks to a judgment they lost in the lawsuit that was brought by Epic. We're seeing state right to repair laws like the Oregon law that bans parts pairing, where you use digital rights management to stop independent mechanics from fixing a device by having a DRM handshake between the device and the main computer in the gadget. And they're just saying, okay, well, you can't do that anymore. And finally, what's happening with tech worker power? Well, tech workers are part of a wave of unionization that is sweeping the country and the world. They figured out they're not entrepreneurs in waiting, they're just workers. A coder at Amazon gets to show up for work with a pink mohawk, facial piercings, and a black t-shirt that says something their boss doesn't understand, not because their boss loves them, but because their boss is afraid of losing them. And when that fear goes away, once there is a sufficient reserve army of coders that they can replace them with, we know what that looks like, because we can look at how Amazon treats its other workers where they have that reserve army, like the workers in warehouses and workers driving their delivery vans. Their warehouse workers are pissing in bottles. They have an injury rate that exceeds anyone else in the sector by a significant margin. William Gibson told us the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. Well, these guys, they're living in the future of Amazon's tech workers. So Amazon's coders, they walked out in support of Amazon's warehouse workers. So the point of all of this is that enshittification, it was a choice, which means that we can make different choices. For about a quarter of a century now, I've worked with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a nonprofit I'm sure most of you are familiar with. We have been fighting enshittification for more than 30 years. We're just one of many groups you can sign up for that you can give time, code, and dollars to help fight for a new good internet that is the worthy successor of our old good internet. With your help, we can make the Enshitternet a footnote in our history, an unfortunate transitional stage between the old good internet we used to have and the new good internet we so desperately need. Thank you.